In this interview with Tina Huang, a sophomore at Yale College, we discuss elitism, authenticity, and sellout culture, as well as what it's like being a first-gen, low-income student at an Ivy League institution today. Hope you enjoy. Welcome, everyone. Today, I am joined by Ms. Tina Huang. Tina, I think, has just finished up her third semester at Yale. Really exciting. So actually, if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about what that's like. What have you been up to these past few weeks?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for having me. Right now, we're on winter break, and so far, I've just been spending time at home with family and preparing some applications for summer internships. So we'll see how that goes. Right now, I'm at a point where I don't know whether I want to be an English major. Okay, well, originally I came in thinking, oh, I'll do global affairs or political science. But after taking courses in those, I was like, never mind. And I feel like I'm someone who would enjoy English more, and I do enjoy the classes. It's just the workload has been more than I expected. So I think this semester is just trying to figure out whether or not I actually enjoy English. I think most of the classes I've taken so far have been in the English department, but I've taken, I'd say, 2 poli-sci classes, and I've enjoyed them, but I think the discussions, they're a lot more general. Like, we don't go as in-depth into the readings as English classes. And that could also just be the nature of the class that I took, because I took an intro class and it was a lecture and we had section once a week. I feel like during sections, it was mostly just asking questions about the readings rather than actually going into the readings. Whereas for my English classes, they were all just seminars, and I feel like, okay, maybe this is not the right way of like generalizing it, but I think English majors, they tend to be really into English, but poli-sci majors, some of them are very into poli-sci, but others are just taking poli-sci. I feel like there's a different amount of passion that these majors have.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I remember taking both as well. And just to echo what you said, like the poli-sci or global affairs classes, the way they're set up in university is you'll have like 1 or 2 major lectures that are 50 minutes or like hour and a half, and then you'll have a shorter 45-minute or 50-minute section where it's like maybe it's 10 people, maybe it's 20 people. It's led by a TA or teaching assistant who's usually a graduate student, and then you guys will discuss the readings in some more depth. Whereas, like you said, the English classes, like from the get-go, even the starting English classes, I think it's like 120. They can be pretty intense.
Yeah.
They're all seminar style. I think they're 2 or 3 times a week. You have to write, you have to present your work in front of the class, get it critiqued and workshopped. And I agree, like I think poli-sci is definitely more popular and like just more people end up taking it. But anyways, okay, wow, thank you. That was really helpful and insightful. If we could just rewind a little bit, and just tell us a little bit more about yourself, Tina, from, I don't know, elementary, middle, high school. Yeah, tell us like where you're from, your quote unquote educational origin story, if you will, from K through 12.
I am from a small town in Virginia called Tazewell. Usually I just ask if people have heard of Virginia Tech, and then I just say, oh, it's 2 hours away. But yeah, it's just in the southwest part of the state. For elementary and middle school, I went to my local schools in Tazewell, and I didn't plan to go to boarding school for high school. So I went to Exeter for boarding school. And the only reason why I did was because one day in 7th grade, my mom, she was talking to my aunt, and my aunt was saying, oh yeah, like, so who was my cousin, she is going to boarding school in Louisiana. And then because of that, I was like, oh, if my cousin can go to boarding school, then so can I. Like, okay, looking back on it, I feel like that was a very, like, I did not think too hard about that, because I feel like going to boarding school at 14 was such a big jump in just the environment that I would be in. And
Yeah.
I definitely got very homesick the first week that I was at Exeter. But it was just like in the moment, I was more so thinking about, okay, I want to go to boarding school. It sounds kind of fun, even though there was a stereotype. And I feel like the stereotype is still around, that people who go to boarding school, it's not for academic purposes, but it's more for like behavioral problems.
Yeah, you were sent away for trouble. You were banished.
Yeah, or you just weren't close to your family, which wasn't true for me for the most part. I think I just wanted to go because, okay, so I found out about Exeter because I just looked up best boarding schools in the US, and then Exeter showed up. Yeah, that was why I chose Exeter. And I only applied to Exeter too. No, I think I should have applied to a lot more schools. I just feel like my entire process was very unorthodox. because nobody else in my family went to boarding school, and I have never heard about prep schools. So the entire process was just I asked my teachers, and then they would be like, "Oh, why would you want to go to a school in New Hampshire?" But then they would just
Hmm.
like write out everything. And then when I got into Exeter and I told my parents that, they were like, "Are you sure you want to go?" Because they didn't expect me to get in
Mm-hmm.
for one, and then like two, they also were just like, "Would you actually want to just spend 4 years in New Hampshire?" Because I think the logic of
Mm-hmm.
boarding school is, and I've talked about this with some of my friends too from Exeter, but it's just you're leaving school and starting college 4 years early. I feel like that, in essence, is what going to boarding school is like. At Exeter, I feel like it was a big culture shock for me because I come from like small town, not academically rigorous. And then you go to this new school where everybody has been like half of the students, or probably more than half, they've been to private schools for most of their lives, or very challenging middle schools. And I think it was just getting adjusted to that environment and also just finding my community there. I think there were also a lot. Okay, a lot is a strong word, but I think Exeter has made efforts to try to have more first gen students. My last year at Exeter, they've had programs meant to reorient kids into a setting like Exeter, like kids from like low income backgrounds, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is really good.
So yeah, I just wanted to build off of some of the things that you were saying. I took some notes. You said that Exeter is kind of like a pre-college, right? Like you're going to boarding school, you're living in the
Mm.
dorm. But maybe you could compare and contrast your Exeter experience living in the dorm in New Hampshire versus living in the dorm in New Haven. What has been some of the similarities or differences
Yeah.
between boarding school and Yale? And then you also mentioned a little bit about the FGLI programs. Tina and I both went to Exeter and Yale, but we never
Mm.
overlapped. We're both FGLI, first gen low income students. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear more about that from, FGLI support at Exeter versus maybe FGLI support at Yale.
Okay, I feel like to answer the question about life, like life in the dorms, I think there is a difference. I feel like people say that, oh,
Mm-hmm.
boarding school helps prepare you for college, but I think there is still a process that you need to go through to be fully acclimated into college life because there is definitely a lot more freedom that you get at Yale compared to Exeter. At Exeter, you always have to check in at a certain time.
Right.
Whereas in college, it's just like you can go out whenever you want. There's still a jump, I feel like. And then in terms of life, like as first gen students, okay, I think Exeter, because there were just less first gen students, like it wasn't spoken about as often. Whereas at Yale, I feel like you have programs like Matriculate, where a lot of students are tutors at, and then you also have YFAM, which I think is the biggest Figly group on campus. I think just because there are a lot more first gen students, there's a lot more discussion about it, even in some of the cultural groups as well in other clubs. Like even some of the sororities, I've heard they have somebody who's like
Mm,
an FGLI, like you know how you have like a DEI officer for some
yeah,
organization?
yeah.
Like some sororities they have like an FGLI like representative, which I think is like that could be either performative or they're actually trying to make strides to have more FGLI
Mm,
representation. I think because there's just more FGLI students, there's more awareness around it. But like I think there's a difference between having these programs in place and then the
mm,
actual like daily life of FGLI students. I don't think the normal FGLI student is going to go through Yale thinking, "Oh, I'm FGLI and everybody else like isn't," or and there are just like so many wealthy kids. But I do think, at least for me, there is an aura of elitism at Yale. Like in both, like the architecture is very elitist for one, but also I think just in the culture of some of the clubs, the different societies that are at Yale, like the secret societies, it's still very elitist. I think I was introduced to this culture of elitism back at Exeter, but I think it's just more intense at Yale.
Can you tell us a little bit more
Yeah.
about like when do you feel this or when do you sense this? Well, I
Mm,
totally get what you're talking about, and I felt this as well. And what you said about the FGLI experience, it's not something that I thought about all the time, but I mean, there were
mm,
times during spring break, where I would be on campus working my job and I check Instagram and people are out on vacation in Europe. It's something that like maybe I didn't think about all the time, but when I did think about it, it would be pretty stark. It would be kind of like infrequent but intense, I guess you could say. I remember another time I was just like in like one of those QR global affairs stats class, and this girl next to me pulled up with what I thought was like clearly a $2,000 purse and then pulled out her laptop. And I was like, okay. I think that was like during one of my first weeks at Yale. At the same time, I do think like Yale has made strides to make the environment and campus less elitist, but I'm just curious about hearing more from your perspective on that front.
Yeah, I do think they've made strides. Like, I've heard of a new program called Yale and You, and it's a mentorship program that pairs current Yale students with incoming students. I just think there's a difference between like trying to put programs in place and then the historical and like institutional legacy of schools like Yale. Like, okay, it's good that they have these programs, but I don't think one program is going to necessarily fix the entire issue. I think a major problem that that FGLI students face is just getting used to the academic structure and the pressure of Yale, as opposed to kids who went to private schools or like academically institutions all of their life. Because I don't think like those 12 years of education will be fixed with one program. Yeah, I guess that leads into the issue about clubs at Yale and also just other like competitive schools, because I think applying to clubs, I think it's better at Yale than, let's say, Harvard, for instance, where I think literally every club you have to apply to. That could be a stretch, but from what I've heard, like it's very intense. Like Yale is better than Harvard in terms of how competitive the clubs are. Like if you want to get into a club, like there are clubs for you. Like for instance, I know a lot of dance clubs, they require auditions, but then there's also dance works where you don't have to apply and you can just join. So I think there are spaces available for that. I think consulting clubs as well, like there are very competitive consulting clubs, but then there are the less competitive ones. I have a friend who wrote an article about this, and it was actually published in The Atlantic, but it was just talking about how the competitive clubs at Yale are sort of like they're student driven, because everybody who goes to Yale is probably competitive in nature to some extent. So they just want to recreate this hierarchy on campus as well. And then that sort of hierarchy is just going to continue past college.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts. The biggest culture shock was arriving at Yale first 2-3 weeks and you have to apply for everything. I was like, this is crazy. You have to apply to volunteer, you have to apply to dance. It's very like chicken and the egg. I'm like, how am I supposed to get experience when you're asking me for like experience from high school in order to participate? It was crazy. And like you mentioned, there's clubs like DanceWorks, and there's some that they say no experience necessary, but like they're gonna take the people with a little bit more experience. And even these clubs that are open to everyone, they're very much in the minority. I think like, let's say there's 100 clubs, maybe like 80-90% are gonna want, they're gonna have some application and be screening for previous job or training or experience or something like that. So I remember applying to just like 10 or 15 clubs, then getting into 2 or 3, being very excited about the ones I got into, but also a little bitter about the ones that I didn't get into. I was just telling Tina before this interview, like I volunteer, or I tried to apply to help volunteer with the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project. I didn't get in. I was just salty. I'll be honest. I was salty for a solid week. I was like, this is ridiculous. I just want to volunteer. I can't believe they're gatekeeping me and they're not even letting me volunteer. Then I ended up helping run one of the Model UN organizations, and it was a really popular organization. It was the Yale Model UN like Taiwan team. And so we had 25 people apply and we could only pick 4 or 5. From that end, it did kind of make sense. When I was on the other side of the table, I was like, okay, people are applying. We want to make sure that they're genuinely committed because it's like a year-long project, year-long commitment. And I started to see a little bit more of the other side, but still, I wonder if there's a way to change that. It's almost institutionalized. It's like beyond something that like me or Tina could potentially change sometimes. It's like something that was there before we even got there. It's probably going to be there even after we leave. But we tried to make like the breakdance club more inclusive and just let anyone who show up like participate and things like that. Yeah, we've been kind of harping on Yale a little bit, so maybe we can talk about some of the good points, some of the highlights. What are some maybe good things about Yale that kind of surprised you or you didn't expect when you got there?
I also think the social scene at Yale is pretty fun. Like, I think they try to admit students from across the board in terms of what type of student they would be. If you want to join a cappella, you could join a cappella. If you're a theater kid, you can do theater. And I think there are enough people who do every one of these niche groups that you can find a community at Yale. I feel like at some other schools, it could be harder. Yeah, and I also think the art scene at Yale, if you need anything, Yale will probably provide it for you. You just have to fill out an application for funding and then you'll usually get it. If you have at least maybe like a somewhat believable reason for needing funding, they'll probably give it to you, which I really appreciate. Like the past summer, I applied for an arts apprenticeship, and all I
Mm,
needed to say was, okay, I have somebody that I can work for. And this was an internship in LA, and I was just working for a filmmaker. And all I had to do was say, okay, I'm interested in doing this. This is what I plan to do. It was just like a very brief outline. And I was like, okay, and this is the person that I'm going to be working for. And then Yale just gave
mm,
me the money
mm.
to spend like 2 months in LA.
Yeah, again with the applications, but no, they make it easy, and I think that's part of the way that they combat elitism. Yeah, you do have to apply, like, but it's just kind of like going through the motions. Like you can't just they can't just give you free money without applying. The applications are just like 1 or 2 pages. They're not intense or daunting. But I
Yeah,
remember like some of my FGLI kids, they're like, "Yo, Daddy Yale, there's so many different avenues that you could talk
yeah,
to your dean about, or just fill out some
yeah.
applications. You had a few thousand here, you had a few thousand there." One of my friends like made a spreadsheet and like made it her mission to travel the world using Yale's money, and she was able to go through like all these different organizations, and some of it was through clubs, some of it was through fellowship, some of it was through her major, and was able to like I think end up getting like tens of thousands. So it's definitely there, and I think that's one way they combat this elitism. But yeah, tell
Mhm.
us more along this vein. What else has surprised you about Yale, maybe when you were coming in from Exeter?
This could be similar to a previous point. Everybody at Yale has a goal. So I do think people are always busy, or there are a
Mm,
lot of people who are always busy. And I think trying to schedule time to see your friends can be difficult because everybody's just doing their own thing. So I think you have
mm,
to make
mm.
more of a concerted effort to actually be like, okay, we're gonna meet up at this time. Because I feel like in high school you just have to
It's
say,
like way
oh, do
more
you want to grab.
organic, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like, "Oh, do you wanna," and I also think, like, because it was boarding school, you just had to be like, "Oh, do you wanna, like, come down, like, to my room?" And then you just, like, study
Yeah.
together, but at Yale, like, even though they have residential colleges, like, it's not the same. Like, you have to use Google Calendar, unfortunately,
Yes.
to just, like, schedule meals with some people because it's just like, you won't be able to meet otherwise.
Tell us more about the GCal culture at Yale. It was definitely strong and thriving when I was there. Maybe you can explain what that is. And I don't know if it's even true at other universities, but just tell us like what this part of Yale is like.
Like, and okay, so you decide to grab lunch with somebody on Monday, and then the person sends you like a Google Calendar invite through email, and you have to accept that, and then you'll have lunch on Friday, maybe, or maybe the person will reschedule. We don't know. But I think it is needed because you're gonna forget about what you have next. I think we don't have to think about it as, oh, this is formalizing friendships at this
Hmm.
point. But
Hmm.
it's just
Hmm.
like, okay, it's just like making life a bit easier for people who are busy. Yeah. And going back to Yale being similar to the real world. Okay, not that everybody is networking with each other because that's definitely not true. I think everybody wants to form genuine friendships, at least like some people. But I
Most
do
people.
think, like, it's always in the back of some people's minds, like, oh, forming these connections for the future because you are at Yale and you are meeting people who are probably going to be leaders of the future. And I don't think this is exclusive to Yale. I think this is exclusive to any elite institution or also just like anywhere in general, like the culture of networking.
Sometimes I don't know. I also had mixed feelings about it. I was like, this just feels so corporate. We have to schedule everything, and it's a
Yeah.
negotiation to figure out which dining hall we're even gonna eat at. Another part of it is like, okay, it's just kind of like the cost of doing business. If we didn't schedule it, it probably wouldn't happen. But then again,
Yeah.
people reschedule like half the time, anyways. But
True.
I
Yeah.
can't even blame them because we've all been the person who has both rescheduled and been rescheduled. But anyways, the other thing, yeah, like you said, contrasting or comparing Exeter to Yale. Like, back in the day, everyone was in the dorm. So you would just knock on their door. You're not going anywhere. Like you have nowhere to be. So I would come down at 9 and just like bother you. But yeah, at
Yeah.
Yale, because like you mentioned, there's just so much more freedom, and it's more like adult life, and people are just like
Yeah.
they're just doing more shenanigans. And they
Yeah.
could be anywhere on a Wednesday night. They could be at Toads, they could be studying in Bass. And then like you said, with finding your community at Yale, that's like the main reason that my friend convinced me to choose Yale over Princeton. He was like, if you want to get a perfect 4.0, grind in Bass, go to med school. There's plenty of people just like you. They'll share their P-sets with you. They'll study with you. They'll teach you about Orgo. And if you want to go out 3 times a week and you want to party, there's also plenty of people just like you. So that was very appealing. Coming from a high pressure cooker environment that was Exeter, I was like, yeah, freedom would be nice.
Yeah.
Just at least having the option to choose. And I think like during my first weeks, I was out and about, doing freshman stuff for a few weeks. And then my small Asian body could only take so much. And then I started to calm down. But anyways, yeah, wow. Thank you for these insights. Hold on. Let's see. What else do we have for you? Let's rewind a little bit. So when you were applying to college, applying to Yale, like what was that process like? What was your journey like? Did you just apply to Yale early? Did you apply to a bunch of different schools? Yeah, what was going on in your head when Tina was a senior at Phillips Exeter Academy?
I tried to like repress this part of my life because it was just like so much stress. But okay, like originally I wanted to ED Columbia just because everybody at Exeter EDs Columbia. Like that's the go-to
Oh,
school.
really?
Yeah, like I think Columbia is it is the top choice for a lot of people. But I think what drew me towards Yale and away from Columbia was the fact that Columbia had the core curriculum. Okay, and the core curriculum, for people who don't know, is just Columbia has like a 1 year long program where they just read Western canon texts. So you have like the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and it's just a way for people to get exposed and like create a community over these shared texts. But I feel like for me, I wasn't like that excited about it. So I was like, okay, maybe Yale would be better because Yale makes being it's a interdisciplinary, it's majored from like I feel like that's what makes Yale. Like Yale and I think Yale is probably for people who are just confused about what they want to do in life. Like that was me, and I didn't know. I was like, oh, I'm interested in global affairs and poli-sci, but I also like doing film, and I also like potentially going into econ, but that never happened. But I think it's just if you want more freedom to explore your interests, then go to Yale. So that's why I ended up applying early to Yale. And fortunately for me, I got in early. And my process was it's a very bad process because I did not really have jobs for any of my other schools at that point. So if I didn't get into Yale, I would just be spending the entirety of break working on my essays for so many other schools. But I was just very lucky to have gone into Yale early. But yeah, I think like the culture at Exeter when I was there was don't talk about college applications unless it's a very close friend because everybody was just stressed. And I think knowing where people would be applying just adds to the pressure of everything.
So what are some things that you wish you knew when you were applying? If you had to rewind a little bit more, if you could give yourself some advice in that time of your life.
I feel like I would have told myself to enjoy my time at Exeter more. I feel like everybody says this, but then like you don't realize it until you actually go through it. Because I think at Exeter I was just very like future focused and I was like, okay, I can just spend more time on this one like reading or on my application instead of hanging out with my friends or like doing something that would make me happy. And I also think that applied to some of my extracurriculars. I felt like I was doing them just for the sake of a college app. I think it was also the fact that you can sort of categorize everything as, okay, this could just be for your resume or for your college app. And then when you look at everything through that lens, everything sort of just seems like, do I actually like this? Is it like, am I passionate about this? Or am I just doing it for college? I wish my younger self would have just been like, okay, this is interesting. I will do this and I will be committed to it because I like it. Rather than, oh, this is interesting and it would look good on a college application. So I will do it. Or I think it's just like doing things based on what I felt rather than trying to rationalize everything. I think that would have helped me a lot. And I think I would have found more passions that way.
Yeah, that is definitely a tough struggle. And I think something that many high schoolers are still grappling with is like figuring out this authenticity. How much am I like really, in love with this activity or hobby versus tailoring it towards college? And it's like kind of like this tough transition or transformation that high schoolers go through, especially from like 9th to 10th to 11th to 12th grade. It's it's definitely not easy. I also think it's not like an either or, like either this is for college or it's for me. But there's probably like an in between where it's like, yeah, this is good for college, but I also really enjoy it just because, there's parts of the process that I love. The same thing with like whatever work or play. It's like, okay, some of this is like a job, but there's also facets of the work that I really enjoy that's like authentic to me.
Yeah.
So
I also think with the culture of applications, like you can probably take anything that you do and then write something insightful about it. Like,
it's
like
just
I feel
about
like
how you
really
spin
can.
it, how you market it. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Ironically, I think that admission officers want that authenticity even more. They kind of They want to see things that are on your application that are just not at all for college, as crazy as that sounds. For me, it was like break dancing. You know, there's like no way that break dancing is, I don't know, at that point in time, there was no way in my mind I was like, I am doing break dancing. I'm gonna break and spit on my head and try to like bend my spine in order to get into college. It was just something that I liked, and it ended up helping. And then one of my friends at Yale, he was kind of like the Exeter version of a proctor. He was like my freshman counselor, and I was the freshman. But anyways, he was in my residential college and also the president of the Yale breakdance club, breakdance team. And he wrote about breakdancing or breaking in his college applications and how he like just loved it. So anyways, I have another question for you, which is kind of about like highest highs and lowest lows. What would you say has been your like best day at Yale, and what would you say are maybe like one of your lowest lows or your toughest days?
I feel like one of my highest highs was first year when we had Secret Santa for the Asian American Students Alliance, or ASA.
Oh, so wholesome.
Yeah, and I think ASA is one of those communities where you don't have to apply, and it's just very welcoming. And you can put in as much effort as you want or as little effort as you want. I know that in my first year they removed the hierarchical structure of it. There were people who were arguing against it because it was like, we need the hierarchy so people can put stuff on their resume. But like it's
of course.
But it's fun. I think you could twist anything and put it on your resume. But yeah, now also doesn't really have the like the concept of presidents. Like they have co-moderators, but it's more just to facilitate, and everybody else, if they want to propose an idea, they can, and then they can see if anybody else is interested. But yeah, the highest high would just be Secret Santa opening presents with everybody else in ASA. And it was also the first snow, so it was just very nice to spend time together with some of my friends. And then lowest low, I don't think I've had like a definitive lowest low, but I think any single day where I have to write essays, like I know I'm an English major, but I'm not that big of a fan of essays. And like I don't think I have an actual lowest low. It's just when I have a lot of work and I don't have enough time to do the work.
Yes, I think that's another change from like high school to college. In high school, there's more like frequent, smaller assignments. And I think in college, it's like, okay, twice, 2 or 3 times a semester, there's a really big paper. And so it's easy to put it off. And then I was just like you, man. I would just put it off to like 2-3 days. And I was like, okay, time to handcuff myself to this chair, chug down like some Starbucks frappuccinos, and I would like bang out a 10 or 15 page paper in like 2 nights. And I was like, we are fingers crossed for a B. And that was my attitude in university. What is a thought-provoking issue or idea that you wish more people thought about? It could be something that you learned about at Yale, just something that's on your mind in this new year.
Well, I think at Yale, it always goes back to, should I sell out or should I not sell out?
Good question.
But it's an issue that everybody thinks about. But it's just like, I don't think any of us could really solve it at an individual level. But I think we can discuss it more, because I think a lot of times people are just like, oh yeah, I'm going to sell out and see where it goes. And then
can you explain a little bit? Because I think some people might not know what selling out even means.
Usually a lot, like I'd say like 30 to 40% of Yale students end up going into consulting post-grad, like either consulting, investment banking. And I think it's just very easy for that to happen because Yale is one of the target schools for a lot of firms. So a lot of firms, they would go to Yale and then recruit on campus. And also I think the culture at Yale, like it fosters a community of people who, like, it's very easy to get into consulting when you're at Yale because everybody is thinking about consulting.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I mean by selling out. I think nobody is blaming anybody for selling out, and I'm also considering selling out too. So it's just like this constant, always in the back of people's minds, just being able to talk about it more critically, or just like being more open about it. Like, okay, I'm selling out, but also like, this is what I hope to do after selling out, or like, these are my other interests. Like, I think it would be nice if we had just more opportunities to see careers outside of consulting or outside of corporate careers.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, like I think Yale is doing it sometimes. Like they're providing us with these, like they provide us with these careers, but then I feel like the bigger narrative is still like you can just end up going to consulting.
This idea of selling out, for sure, it's related to many of the things that we've touched upon. I think it's related to the elitism at Yale. It's related to like the authenticity note. I'm curious to know maybe more about like, how do you think your experience maybe as like a first gen low income student has affected the way you think about selling out, or how do you think those concepts are related?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of first gen students. Okay, I give first gen students a pass if they want to sell out because it's like
We're
you
trying to
want the
feed our
money.
families, guys. Yeah.
Like you want the money. But also at the same time, it's always people who are first gen who are also like most proximate to other social issues. And then you also want to
Yeah.
bring awareness to these other social issues or like try as much as you can to. So it's like very difficult because it's like you want to make money, but then you're also in a position where like I feel like a lot of first gen students, like it's hard not to care about everything else that's going on in the world.
Yes. I completely agree with you with like, I think that the Yale recruiting process is really weird. When I say Yale recruiting, I mean like companies coming to Yale. First off,
Mm,
there are some big companies that come, like you said, they're mainly like whatever, tech firms or big business. But then another part of it is like, it's not really like there's a Goldman booth on campus, like actively recruiting us all the time. It's like there's some
mm,
events here and there, but it's almost more of just like a subconscious culture that permeates throughout Yale. And you kind
mm.
of go in naive little rabbits or whatever, and you don't really think about these issues at all. And then somewhere around maybe again, it's like these winter breaks, man. These winter breaks, parents and friends are talking about their
Yeah,
summers, what they're gonna do during their
yeah.
internships or their vacations or blah blah blah. And then it gets you thinking about this sort of stuff. I'm not sure it's something that the two of us can solve in this StreamYard call, but it is something
No.
that I've thought about a lot, and I just wish
Mm,
more students, alumni had more honest conversations about it, or even just proposing like, hey, here are all the things you could be doing during the summer. Or I'm sure there's
mm,
also a way to merge like business and social responsibility more. But yeah, full transparency, I was about to say like I sat down and applied to like 100 consulting, investment, business development jobs, internships, opportunities when I was like a freshman and sophomore. And I was shocked at how hard it was for me. I was just like, again, I felt like it was a scenario where you needed experience in order to get the job. And you need the job to get
mm,
experience. It felt so
mhm,
chicken and egg. I felt kind of trapped. And then I had another
mm,
friend who was first gen low income, super similar scenario, brilliant girl, family also grew up running a Chinese restaurant. She's super entrepreneurial, and she got a job at one of these firms, and she worked there for a summer. And she told me how to play the game. She's like, yeah, you have to talk to the recruiter. You have to like cozy them up. You can't just like randomly blindly submit your resume. You have to go through this
mhm,
avenue. I was like, okay, this feels like a lot of hoops to jump through, and also felt very like inauthentic. It felt kind of fake. But anyways, she did
mm,
the opportunity. She made some good money, and then she was like, yeah, not for me. And then we both decided to become entrepreneurs at Yale and pave our own path. And that's
mm,
another thing that like I wish was more talked about as well. But the number of people at Yale in particular, this is not true for other Ivy League schools like Stanford, Harvard, MIT, even Cornell, I think have very strong entrepreneurial culture. But Yale, the number of entrepreneurs and people who are kind of like blazing their own path was really low. I think there was like maybe
mm,
less than 100, less than sometimes even like 50 undergrad entrepreneurs in a community of like 6,000 undergrads. So that's like less than 1%. A lot of people just end up moving towards, like you said, finance, consulting. And then another third do grad school, become like
mhm,
researchers, PhDs, etc. And then the other
mhm.
third is like figuring out what do we want to do? Do we want to do nonprofit work? Do we want to work in a publishing house? Kind of like paving our own path. But yeah, you don't need to figure it all out. And a lot of life is very serendipitous. Things will kind of like fall into place and click. Tina, don't worry. I've also been where you're at.
That is good to know.
Also, like what you're going through is what every single Yale student is going through. Like whether they talk about it openly or not, I promise you they're like thinking about this, having these thoughts. Not just Yale student, but like really college
Everybody.
students.
Yeah,
Everybody. Yeah.
everybody. Everybody.
I think Yale students are very famous for harping on Yale, as we should. It's good to critique the institution from within. Otherwise, like outsiders will critique it, and we probably do a better job as insiders, anyways. But I
Mm,
really do think that many of the organizations are getting less elitist and more inclusive and more authentic. I think if you compare Yale to like it's hard to conceptualize it this way, but like 30 or 50 years ago, of course, it's like completely different place. Even Skull and
yeah.
Bones and the Whiff and Poofs, which used to be just like all males, all guys, and just slowly becoming more and more inclusive, and everyone's really making effort. And I think it starts a lot with students and student groups, even just changing some of the organizations. I fingers crossed one day that more organizations will be like ASA or like the Yale breakdance team, where you don't need 10 years of experience in order to join.
Yeah.
and the hierarchy is much more flat. I think that might make for a better student experience as well. And I was very surprised because Exeter was not like that at all. You know, we just assumed that you had no experience because you're 13 or 14. So
Yeah.
and also you could still join clubs like anytime. At Yale and college, it's weird. Like you can only join at the start of a semester, and then aside from that, they're like, nope, it's very hard to join halfway.
That's true.
All
Yeah.
that, yeah. All that being said, I do think things are getting better. There's just more and more opportunities and more things to do. But then, you know, another part of it is like we can sit here and be the peanut gallery and complain, or we can probably do something about it. So that's another thing that I think about too.
But I think like doing anything about it, we'd have to be like it would have to happen like after graduation. I feel like I guess like the
yeah.
students themselves will have to just change the culture of the clubs.
I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it can be done. And I think like you guys are even doing it within ASA, you know, it's like small steps.
True.
So it doesn't have to be like, oh, okay, 10 years down the line, here's my cash, now change things. But we can actually do some stuff from within to play our parts, do our job, do our role, whatever they call it. In closing, thank you so much for your time. Just really appreciated your authenticity, openness, honesty.
Thank you, Kevin. It was really nice talking to you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, I will end the recording here, but we can keep chatting for a little bit.